Do you ever get objections and do you know how to handle them? Well, in today's video, I'm going to actually share with you some of the techniques that you can actually use so that you can lessen the amount of objections and, for that matter, how to overcome them. So stay tuned.
Hi everyone, Robert Villanueva here. Over a buyer's home. And of course, as always, I'll see you at the top.
Welcome back. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about how to handle objections. This is probably one of the things that can be pretty universal. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. Obviously, I'm speaking to mostly realtors, but this is something that can be utilized in so many different fields of sales. Now, the first thing we have to identify is the difference between a condition and with what is an objection. Okay, what's a condition? Well, a condition is basically something that we can't overcome. No matter what, I don't care how masterful you are, we can't overcome this condition. This is something, as an example, a loss, or for that matter, a gain of income. Like a job relocation, pregnancy, death, retirement, things of that nature. The second example is that of an objection. And the objection is, in most cases, some version of hesitancy. The interest rates, waiting for the market to slow down, just all of these, in a sense, excuses, waiting for the right house, all of these things. Now, I'm not saying some of these objections are not valid, but there is a big difference between a condition, which is something no matter what, we can't overcome. And whereas, of course, an objection is something that ideally, if we answer it correctly, that we can overcome it. Now, let's talk about where objections come from. Because objections, in most cases, not always, but a large percentage of it comes from our poor presentation. So in a poor presentation, when you find yourself, you're going through, you're presenting, and people give us these objections, the reason why these objections come up is because they don't have quite the certainty, whether it's commission, whether it's price, whether it's the length of the contract, whether it's ourselves in regards to that. We also have to understand this. This is one thing that I learned early on, and that is that in most cases, it's a good thing that we get objections. Why? Because for the most part, they see value in us. However, in some areas, they find themselves in a position where there is a little bit of a resistance. I like you, Robert, but I'm not quite certain about the price. I like you, Robert, but I don't know if I really want to pay you, or I see the value in you in regards to this commission. So when we get objections, it's not the end of the world. This is, in other words, a place where we can, when you become masterful, you can actually become a powerful closer and be able to get more deals. Unfortunately, what most people do is that they get an objection and then they just kind of shrug their shoulders and they go, okay, think about it, or whatever that may be. Now, in most cases, if they don't see any value, what they'll do is, instead of giving us objections and they just don't want to do business with us, they'll start to give us things along the line of, you know what, I appreciate all the information. We'll let you know. You know what, we're going to think about it. I'll give you a call. Don't worry about calling me. I'll call you when we make that decision. And you're like, wait a minute, is there even an objection? That's what I'm concerned with. So when we find ourselves in a position where that's taking place, that's the part where we have to, of course, be very, very careful with, because when we get an objection, at least if we answer it and overcome it, we can ideally put ourselves in a stronger position so that, of course, we can close. Now, there are some things I talked about how we can have less objections. How do we curb this? Well, the way we curb this is we have to get to know their motivation. How do we get to know their motivation? I've talked about this in other videos. We need to know how to ask questions that are based on who, what, when, where, why, how, and on the occasion, if. These questions will always start with these type of words. And these questions will put us in a position where we can get a little bit further in depthness of what the information we're trying to seek. Let me give you an example. Somebody ends up saying that we're making a move over to Florida. Okay, cool. How soon do you want to be there? Oh, well, we want to be there by the summertime. Okay, well, we had the motivation. They're wanting to make a move to Florida. They want to be there by the summertime. Yeah, but there's more to that. And how do we get the more? The way we get the more is the who, what, when, where, why, as I mentioned. Who is most excited about making the move to Florida? Where exactly in Florida is that you're moving to? How is this going to benefit you and your family? Why is making this move to Florida so important for you? Who's actually most excited about you coming to Florida? If we were to sell this home in the next 30 days, would that be a pro or would that be a con? Do you see how some of these questions give you the opportunity to be able to get more information about their motivation? Well, why is this important? The reason why this is important is the more we get in terms of their motivation, it gives us the opportunity to present based on that. Why is this so important to have their motivation? Well, let me go in this direction. What do most agents actually present on? Themselves. They talk about how great they are. They talk about, oh my gosh, I won this many awards. I've sold this many houses. This is what makes me so special. I am so grand. I am amazing. Our company, oh my goodness, don't even get me started. This is so important. When agents present from a perspective of just talking about themselves and just talking about the company, do you really honestly think that the consumer cares? They don't. Now, is having a resume important? Of course it is. But in most cases, it plays this much of a part in regards to with what you're trying to accomplish. When we talk about their motivation, it gives them the opportunity to feel as if though you are actually taking care of more of their needs versus our needs. Now, where does this show up? See, here's the thing is that motivation, when you're presenting based on that, it gets the opportunity to talk more about, like I said, about them. When we start talking about facts, figures, stats, me, the company, all that is logic. And what logic does, it makes people think. And we don't need them to think more. We need them to act more. And the way we get them to act more is we get it to be based on their emotion. Their emotion is what gets them to act. So we want them acting more and thinking less. Now, when we're sitting there talking about, as an example, I'm going through a presentation, I can go in the direction of this is what's going on in the market. This is how many homes have sold. This is the average price per square foot, blah, 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 blah. Or I can sit there and I can talk about their motivation. And when I talk about their motivation, you'll notice that in most cases, their guard actually lowers down. They're not quite as defensive. I'm going to share with you here real quick with what I call is my fish story. Fish. What's my fish story? So probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I was going through prospecting and I was calling expireds. And as I was going through calling expires, I spoke to this one gentleman. And this gentleman that I spoke with, it was the husband and his wife. And when I spoke to the husband, I asked the husband, where are you guys moving to? He said he was moving to Florida. What's the benefit of making the move over there? Well, my mother-in-law is not doing too well. Okay, well, I'm sorry to hear about that. Well, how is this going to impact you and your family? Well, my wife wants to spend more time with her mom. That's fair. Now, how is this going to impact you and your family? Why is this move so important? Who's most excited about making this move? It's all about them, is basically with what I'm getting at. But I did actually do something a little bit different because I was hearing something in this person as they were suggestive or volunteering, I should say better yet, information. Well, I'm going to be going over to Florida and then I'm going to actually buy a boat. Oh, interesting. Tell me a little bit about this boat, is what I asked the gentleman. Now, mind you, I'm prospecting. This isn't expired. In most cases, these people are just over the top. But I asked the gentleman, tell me a little bit more about this boat. My wife said if we end up making the move over to Florida, that I can go ahead and buy a boat. Okay, got that. What kind of boat would you be buying? And he could not stop about his boat. So I asked him, his name was John, or his name is John. And I asked John, I said, John, help me understand a little bit about this. If I'm hearing correctly, you've been here in California your entire life, and now you're actually going to uproot your family and go over to Florida so that you can be with your mother-in-law. Now, why can't you just simply buy a boat and stay here? He goes, well, here's the thing, Robert, is that either you're going to be on a really crappy lake or you have to pay $1 million for a boat slip on the ocean or on the coast. I said, yeah, that's true. And the best part about that, Robert, is that I literally can park my boat in my backyard. I was like, oh, I got that. Well, what else is the benefit? Well, happy wife, happy life. We went down that avenue. Make a long story short, I basically ended up setting an appointment. I ended up going out there. I interviewed with 4 other agents. Now, I've interviewed, I've lost some, and I've gotten some. That's not my point of in regards to this. My point is this. When I went out there, I actually presented on their motivation. I talked about the boat to the husband. I talked to the wife about her mom. And that's all in a sense I talked about. Of course, I stayed within the script. I used the script. I continued to move all the way down through the entire presentation, but it was mostly focused on them versus the facts and the figures. At the end, as much as I tried to close on them, they said, Robert, we're just a little bit confused. We've interviewed 5 total realtors and we don't know really what direction we want to go with. And by this point in time, I just said, you know what, I got to let off just a little bit. I got to just take my chances and not push them over the edge. I called them the next day. John, hey, it's Robert, just reaching out to you. Just wanted to see if you guys ended up making a decision. Robert, we did. And we actually decided to go with you. Awesome. That's exciting. I'm really excited about getting you guys over to Florida and getting you there sooner than later. But if I may ask, John, what was the reason? What was the determining factor to choose me versus the 4 other realtors? And he says, Robert, you were really the only person that actually knew what was the purpose of our move. Everybody else was talking about them. All they were talking about is how big they are, how important they are, the type of marketing they're going to do, the facts, the figures, their company, and all this other stuff. No, I'm not going to use the one instance as for the purpose of my example, and that's always going to be the case. But in this case, that was the main reason why I ended up winning that listing. We're not done yet. We ended up going through, we ended up finding a buyer. We went through the entire process, but then we ran into a snag while we were in the process of selling under contract in escrow. And the snag that we ended up hitting is that the appraisal fell short by, I think it was about 15, if I don't remember correctly, it might have been $20,000, which wasn't that big of a deal. The property was about a $600,000 property, but the problem was that the buyer did not actually have the money. And the decision at this point in time, the market was soft. So it's not one of those things I could have just simply just put it back on the market, get another buyer. We tried to go through and negotiate and, a couple of bucks through commission and here and there and all this other stuff. Well, at the end, it ended up being short by about $10,000. So I asked John, look, I get it. I understand we all have to make a sacrifice in order to make this deal happen. Is there a possibility that you could get a boat for $10,000 less? Yeah, I mean, I guess I would have to probably get the whatever, the 4 foot or less is basically what ended up happening. So when it's all said and done, the whole entire presentation, the entire process of it was focused on their motivation. And this happens a lot. This is what really helped me become a very successful realtor, understanding the importance of people's motivation instead of presenting from a place of logic. And this helps us with objections. So what that basically does is it gives us the opportunity to be able to paint this picture of the things that actually motivate them. So what I want you to do, based on, in a sense, my fish story, and thank you for actually listening to it, what I want you to do is I want you to understand the importance and the value of being able to talk about their motivation. When you do that, the amount of objections become less. And it now starts to become more about whether they want to use me or they don't want to use me. And if they don't want to use me, it could be because of this factor, or this factor, which again, we can actually use an objection handler for that. There are what are called isolation clauses, okay? Which I won't go into the depthness of that. But what I want to show you instead is how to handle overall objections. And the way you want to handle the objections is there's a couple of different things that you can actually do. The first thing is I want you to take objection handlers. There's plenty of them out there. My mentor is Mike Ferry. I use the objection handlers. And what I basically do is I take one of the objection handlers and I practice it and I memorize it and I go over it week after week after week after week after week. And I rotate every week a new objection handler. That's a way of doing that. Now that helps me in regards to the memorization. The other thing is, one thing that I would do is I would go through it, I would prospect, I'd make 30, 40, 50 contacts for the day, and I would start to write down the objections that I was getting most common. Bring me a buyer. We decided to take the home off the market. We're going to relist with the same agent. All of these things. But what I also started to do is next level, I started to tally. Okay, that one I got 4 times today. That one I got 3 times today. And this one I got once. Over the course of the week, well, that one I got 16 times. This one I got 12 times. This one I got 10 times. This one I got 9 times. And this other one I got 8 times. So what I started to now do is I started to practice the more common objections. And by practicing the more common objections, here's the one thing. I'm going to give you a little bit of a cheat code. And I talk about this almost in every video in regards to a cheat code. There are 40, 50, 100 different objection handlers. Here's the interesting thing is the majority of the agents will only have to work on 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 of the objections that they get most common. Why is this? The reason why this is because in most cases, you're calling a similar source. So you're going after the same source. You're getting, because of your way of approaching things, as you start to funnel people in the direction of getting these type of objections. So because of that, you don't have to memorize all of them. It's a good idea to, because you never ever know what's going to happen. And of course, whenever you come across that, you're always going to have that to your arsenal. But you want to practice the ones that you get the most often. Now, let's quickly go back. As I mentioned, I would practice all of the different objection handlers. And as far as practicing all of the different objection handlers, I was with a brand name company for about 12, maybe 13 years of my career, almost half of my career. And I never got I never heard of your company. But then the moment that I shifted over to an independent, my own company, at the time it was called Robert Villanueva Real Estate, I would actually get quite often, I've never even heard of your company. So guess what I had to practice now? My point is you want to make sure you're constantly looking at what objections you're getting, start to tally them, and then you want to practice them more often. So when you're going through, when you're doing your daily role play, ideally you're going to go ahead and practice it from a direction. One of two ways is I'm going to sit there and role play, for example, with Sally, and I'm going to say, hey, Sally, do me a favor. I want you to throw whatever objections you want, but do me a favor. Can you make sure you include the, bring me a buyer as an example, or the whatever. The second way is I would do it the other way around. When Sally was going, I would then go through and throw her the objection that I was trying to work on. And then on Monday, I'd role play with Sally and go, that was okay. And then on Tuesday, I role played with Bob, and it's like, ooh, I like that one. And then on Wednesday, I would role play with Wendy, and I was like, ooh, that one's really good. And then on Thursday, I would role play with Joe, and I'm like, oh man, that is like creme de la creme. So I would start to learn how to practice the way that the other people would actually get it, or respond, I'm sorry, would be able to respond. And a good percentage of the time when I was working on this, I would look at to who are the people that are actually getting better results. So when I would role play with somebody, I'm not sitting here trying to pinpoint in regards to the greats and the not so greats, but it was always helpful when I would role play with somebody, and as good as they may be, and maybe they didn't get quite the greatest results with that particular source, but then I would role play with a person that would get 12, 15, 20, 30 listings based on that one source. I got to listen to that person. So those are things that I want you to pay attention to. Now let's practice, or let's start to break down, I should say better yet. Let's break down how to handle the objection, because in the handling of the objection, it's very simple. Number one is we can memorize all of the objection handlers. Now, that's an option, okay? The problem, though, is that you're not always going to have them readily available. But it's a good idea to practice it so that you can actually have it as part of your arsenal. Instead, I prefer to have some version of with what is more of a universal close. And a universal way of handling these objections is you're going to want to repeat, affirm, ask a question, and then close. So if a person sits there and gives you whatever objection, you're going to repeat it. You're going to affirm it, whether you agree or not agree. You're going to ask a question, and then you're going to close. So in that, I don't care with what it is that you give me as an objection. We're only looking at paying an agent 1% commission. You're only looking at paying an agent 1% commission. I can understand where you're coming from, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. If I may ask, If there was a way that I could potentially net you the same or more money and charge you a full commission, would you want to know about that? Well, what do you mean? That's exactly why we need to get together and talk about it. Did you want to do that today at 3 o'clock, or would you rather do that at 4 o'clock? Do you see how I did that? So I repeated, I affirmed, I asked the question, and then I ended up closing. And you can do that over and over and over again. And that is what I want to teach you today, because that's something that you can use multiple times. You might have to start very, very slow and then build your way up. It's kind of like dancing. The first time you actually go through, you're kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then before you know it, you're dancing. So it's the same thing when it comes time to handling objections. In this, I want you to take away, it does not matter what objection they give you. You're going to always use their objection for the purpose to close. Let me give you another example. Just silly, off the wall, stupid as can be. Excuse the example, but I'm going to use it. Somebody sits there and says, you know what, we're going to be waiting until the purple cows come home. That's right. They're going to wait till the purple cows come home, and that's when they're going to sell. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I understand you're waiting for the purple cows to come home, and that may make sense. However, if it would make more sense to get on the market now so that you can profit, would you like to know about that? Well, what do you mean? Well, that's exactly why I want to get together. Let's talk about the benefits of doing it now, or you still have the opportunity to wait for the purple cows to come home. Did you want to do that at 3 o'clock, or would you rather do that at 4 o'clock? I know it's silly, but I just kind of want to use it as an example to where it does not matter the response, you can be able to close. Here's another thing. I want you to understand this. This is the last point. So in this point, I call it the rule of 7. What's the rule of 7? The rule of 7 is that the top producers understand this. It's going to take, on average, about 7 closes in order for you to actually get the appointment, the contract signed, or whatever the signature may be in regards to that decision. So a good percentage of the time when you're going through and you're handling objections, the power behind the way that you handle it is important, but also understanding that it's going to take, in some cases, 4, 5, 6, even 7 times to close before they finally say, okay, Robert, I get what you're saying. Yes, let's go ahead and move forward. Okay. So hopefully all this information is helpful. We're going to continue to put out more videos, but if you can do me a favor, if you can go ahead and hit the subscribe button. The other thing I want you to point out is you can see this little QR code here has all of my other contact information, which of course would include all of the other platforms I'm on, which would include Instagram, TikTok, as well as Facebook. Now on Facebook, I have a private group, and in this private group, we actually work on these very same things 3 times a week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And those times are 7:30 a.m. until 8 a.m. Pacific Standard. So I'm going to encourage you to join all of my other platforms. Hopefully this video was helpful. And of course, as always, your favorite coach here, Robert Villanueva. I'll see you at the top.
Hi everyone, Robert Villanueva here. Over a buyer's consult. And of course, as always, I'll see you at the top.